Next speaker really needs no introduction. It's former Secretary of Defense William Perry. You know, quite often when people talk about the risk of nuclear war and talk about how maybe we should reduce our nuclear arsenals rather than increase them. Quite often this is dismissed by saying, oh, these people saying that, they're just a bunch of tree huggers who don't know anything. And I've heard this quite often, and I'm sure you have as well. Now, this description about tree huggers who don't know anything, it doesn't really fit very well on any of the speakers I've heard so far in this conference, all the professors and other experts. And there's nobody on this planet, I think, that description fits less than the next speaker, William Perry, because this is the man who was in charge of our nuclear arsenal, who knew more than anybody else, undoubtedly even more than President Clinton, whom he served under, because he was the one who really had to deal with it. And he has an amazing personal story that we'll come back and talk a bit more about. He has and the most wonderful thing about his adventures, and it's thanks to him in no small part that the Ukraine went from having 2,000 nuclear weapons to having 0. The whole non-Lugar initiative implementation, where we in the U.S. paid cash to get rid of dangerous, highly enriched nuclear materials to be turned into civilian electricity in the U.S. and so on. He's done so many wonderful things. And amazingly, he just came out with this fantastic book, which I just finished reading. It's really a page-turner. And if anyone is interested in buying it, the good news is we're going to actually be having it's for sale at 5 p.m. at the end of this session. And even better news, he actually has kindly volunteered to sign it for you also, if you'd like. So we have several boxes here. Before we bring him up here, so he can give his take on this, he asked me to start this by doing a sort of Freudian thing and delving into his subconscious. So I'm going to start by showing you one of his worst nightmares. Maybe we can dim the lights to get into the spooky spirit of nightmares.
Buried deep under these bone-dry high plains, in a covert section of a massively hardened centrifuge facility, a team is hard. They are members of a breakaway faction of the country's security forces, and they are busy enriching 40 kilograms of uranium. By July 3rd, they achieved their target of 90% enrichment, and then transferred the uranium to a nearby secret lab, where another team of technicians assembles it into a crude nuclear bomb. On August 31, they finished their work. They put the bomb in a packing crate labeled agricultural equipment and transported it to a nearby airfield where it is stored in a warehouse. 2 weeks later, it is removed and loaded onto an aircraft with civilian air cargo markings. It flies to Dubai, where the crate is transferred, along with other goods and equipment, to a global air transport freighter. Destination, Washington, D.C. The plane lands at Washington Dulles International Airport at 2:47 a.m. on September the 15th. By late afternoon, the crate is delivered to a warehouse in the southeast part of the district. Then, before daybreak, on September the 17th, the bomb is removed from the crate and loaded onto a delivery truck. Several hours later, an American citizen eases the truck out into traffic. She drives it to a location on Pennsylvania Avenue, midway between the White House and the Capitol building. At 11:09 a.m., she stops in the middle of traffic, climbs down onto the street, and triggers the detonator. The bomb explodes with a power of 15 kilotons. There are more than 80,000 instant deaths, including the president, the vice president, the the Speaker of the House, and the 320 members of Congress present when the bomb goes off. There are also more than 100,000 seriously wounded, and virtually no place to treat them. Telecommunication facilities throughout the greater Washington area have gone down. Soon, cable news is broadcasting scenes of vast devastation from the capital. A short time later, all major news outlets report receiving an identical message. The message claims that 5 more bombs are hidden in 5 different cities across the country. It says one of these bombs will be set off each week for the next 5 weeks, unless all American troops based overseas are ordered to return immediately to the U.S. homeland. The nation is hurled into panic. Everything begins shutting down. Within a half hour, the stock market drops more than 70% before trading is halted. From coast to coast, masses of people begin to stream out of cities, no matter their size or location. There is widespread gridlock. Cell phone systems are soon overwhelmed, and calls cannot go through. Internet access is impossible in many regions, and the nation is now in a constitutional crisis. By succession, the Senate President pro tem is now the country's president. But he is being treated for pancreatic cancer far from the Capitol at the Mayo Clinic. The Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, both of whom were testifying to the House Armed Services Committee on their recent budget requests, are dead as well. Martial law is declared in Washington and surrounding regions, and the next day, the entire country. There is widespread looting and violence in many cities. Federal and National Guard troops are mustered. Soon there are reports of troops firing on crowds. There are increasing numbers of reports of crowds rioting against immigrants and foreigners. Within days, the military begins to construct large detention centers around the country.
Without further ado, let's welcome William Perry.
Well, that video showed you the possible catastrophic outcome of one nuclear bomb out of the 15,000 that are in the world. My main message to you today is that, in my judgment, the danger of a nuclear catastrophe is higher today than it was at any time during the Cold War. Higher today than during the Cold War. I lived through the Cold War. I had first-hand experiences of just what this danger was. I'm going to talk a little bit about them today. We had, all during the Cold War, the possibility of a nuclear war by a miscalculation, either by the leaders of the United States or the Soviet Union. The poster child, I suppose, for a war by miscalculation was the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was a young analyst at that time and was called upon to work with a small team that every day, worked all day studying the intelligence that had come in from that day. And by midnight, we had prepared a report to go to President Kennedy the next morning to help guide him through his decisions the next day. I, at that time, every day, I believed when I went into that analysis center, was probably my last day on Earth. I was just close enough to it that I knew just how dangerous it was. And to this day, I believe that we survived that crisis more by good luck than by good management. And everything I have learned since then has only confirmed that judgment. Today, we do not have Cuba as a crisis, but we have Ukraine and potentially could have the Baltics. Indeed, if the Russian forces go into Ukraine, to the Baltics, the way they went into Ukraine, they will be confronting NATO troops. There will be a military conflict between Russian troops and NATO troops. And the danger, of course, is that that conflict could escalate into a nuclear war. Beyond a war by miscalculation, all during the Cold War, every day during the Cold War, we faced the possibility of an accidental nuclear war. I myself experienced 3 different false alarms. One of them was very personal. I got a phone call at this time I was the Undersecretary of Defense. I got a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I picked up the phone. The voice on the other end identified himself as the watch officer at the North American Air Defense Command, and the general got right to the point. He told me his computers were showing 200 ICBMs on the way from the Soviet Union to the United States. I will never, ever forget that moment. For one heartbreaking instant, I believed we were about to experience the catastrophe that we had avoided during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Of course, it was a false alarm. The general happily had recognized it as a false alarm. Why was he calling me? I was the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering. He was calling me because he wanted to figure out what the hell had happened to his computers that had given this false signal. I could not help with that. We couldn't figure it out that night. It took us 2 days to learn, as you heard from Elizabeth this morning, that it was an operator who had mistakenly put a training tape into the computer. It was human error. Today, we still have the policy of launch on warning. We still have the possibility of reliving the experience I've told you about. What saved us then was the context. What was happening then, there was nothing going on in the world that suggested there'd be a problem. The other examples that Elizabeth gave you this morning, again, nothing was happening to suggest that there should be an attack. And that context was very important in avoiding a disastrous nuclear war. Had that false alarm occurred during the Cuban Missile Crisis or during the earlier Mideast crisis, there might have been a very different outcomes. It's also true in the case of a war by miscalculation, that context is everything. The bad news today is that the context is becoming ugly again between the United States and Russia. There are many reasons for this. One of them you heard about today was the restarting of a nuclear arms buildup. In a sense, we're about to relive the nuclear arms race that we had during the Cold War. That's one very dangerous aspect. Aside from the billions of dollars that are going to be spent about that, which you heard about, there's the danger that causes by creating the context. There are other contexts in terms of the rhetoric. This case, mostly rhetoric from Russia to the United States, but not exclusively. The head of Russian media, a government appointed by President Putin, stated about a year ago in the Russian media that Russia is the only nation capable of turning the United States into radioactive ash, which of course is a true statement. The question is not whether it's true or false. The question is what motivated him to make that statement. A scientist in Russia working at a government Russian lab recently announced that he was studying a way of the effects, how he could affect a huge
volcanic explosion in the United States by dropping a hydrogen bomb on Yellowstone Park. Some of you may be familiar with the fact that Yellowstone is a home of a dormant but very powerful volcano. And he was speculating how they might be able to cause that to go off and destroy the United States with volcanic ash. He neglected to point out that if that happened, it would also have destroyed Russia with volcanic ash. That was an oversight in his calculation, I think. And then there's been this famous story about Russian robotic subs being developed. All of these are, in a sense, stupid bluster. Stupid because without these fanciful weapons, Russia already has enough conventional nuclear weapons to destroy them, us and them, several times over. But the bluster creates this very dangerous context that makes it an accidental nuclear war, or a war by miscalculation, from a very, very low probability to not such a low probability. Beyond that, and those are experiences, those are dangers we lived during the Cold War. Besides that, there are dangers that are new since the Cold War. The possibility of a nuclear terrorist attack, which we just gave you a hypothetical but gripping scenario of how that could happen. And the possibility of a regional nuclear war. Regional nuclear war could be between Pakistan and India. So you say, why should we care? That's way on the other side of the earth. Well, first of all, we should care about the tens of millions of people who would be killed in that. And secondly, it can come quite home, because you heard this morning that a nuclear war in India and Pakistan could very well cause a nuclear winter, which would affect everybody on the planet. So, in sum, I am bringing to you today, I think, a distressing message. And so we have to somehow look for hope about what we could do to change the environment we're in now, which is causing this dangerous situation. You have heard, just in the last session and other sessions today, things that people are trying to do to change the situation. And I commend those to your attention. I myself believe that this is going to be a long, hard slog. And it's going to involve, to succeed, it's going to involve many more people than the people who are sitting in this room. It's going to involve a program, I think, of mass education. So the more the public understands the extent of the danger, which indeed we all face today. And that's led me to dedicate the balance of my life to this process of education. I've written a book for that purpose, but I understand that books only get through to a select few. And so I'm having that book translated in 6 or 7 different languages, so it will be read in China and Russia, Japan, Korea, other countries as well. I'm making an online version of the book available. I've taken my lectures and my courses at Stanford, and I'm transforming them into what's called a MOOC, a massive open online course, on the theory that if I want to get across to young people, I have to go to the internet to do that. And if I want to get across to large numbers of people, I have to go to the internet to do that. I have formed a project called W.J. Perry Project, which is directed by my daughter, Robin Perry, who's sitting here. Also, my son, David Perry, is working on that project, particularly on the education aspect of the project. And together, we are trying to work hard to get the message across, what the danger is and what people might be able to do about it. I have been asked by some of my friends and colleagues why I am spending my golden years on what is, as they see it, a hopelessly idealistic, unrealistic view of trying to transform such a major aspect of our civilization today. And I answered them by quoting, give them a quote from Andrei Sakharov. Some of you may have heard of Andrei Sakharov. He's a Russian scientist who was largely responsible actually for the development of their hydrogen bomb. But after he left his field of science, he devoted the last years of his life to political reform in the Soviet Union. Now, can you imagine something more hopelessly unrealistic than trying to effect political reform in the Soviet Union in the 70s? And he received the same kind of a comment from his friends that I get from my friends. And here's how he answered them. I like this. He said, there is a need to create ideals, even when you cannot see a path to achieving them. Because if there are no ideals, then there is no hope. He pursued his ideals. He kept hope alive in the Soviet Union for major political reforms. And that is the message on which I'm going to end my talk today. We must pursue our ideals in order to keep hope alive, that we can have a world without nuclear weapons for our children and for our grandchildren. I thank you.
Thank you. Stay here and we're having a Wow. We have time for for questions, so please line up at the 2 microphones. And I'm just so touched. You know, my father is 88, so if Dr. William Perry can do this at 88, we can do anything. Come on, never say never. Yeah. Yeah. So,
earlier introductory comments. I was Secretary of Defense. When I was the Secretary of Defense, we dismantled 8,000 nuclear weapons, half of them in the former Soviet Union and half of them in the United States. In fact, my top priority when I was Secretary of Defense was the dismantling of the deadly Cold War nuclear legacy. And for 4 years, we succeeded in doing that. But we're going backwards today.
I can't think of a better embodiment either of the spirit of MIT than you here. You combine the geekiness of a mathematician, a PhD in math, and this really very rational, analytic approach to things with the ideals, the passion, and look at the amazing results that can give. So we can hack it. We can do it. You first.
I am sure you know the correctness of, or can correct me on my vague understanding, but I wish you would. My understanding is that in the Cuban Missile Crisis, Curtis LeMay of the Air Force in the cabinet room was advocating a first strike against the Soviet Union and Cuba, and that the other military officers involved in the Joint Chiefs, I believe, agreed with that. And I'm not sure there were any people in the room other than Robert Kennedy and the president himself who were firmly opposed to starting a nuclear war. What was the composition of the vote, if you want to put it that way?
Let me emphasize, I was, I think, 30 years old at the time. I was a young analyst playing a very small role, sending messages up to the top. I have no idea what happened in those cabinet rooms. I have read, however, several books, including McNamara's book, which more or less agree with what's been described here. But I have no first-hand information on that.
Secretary Perry, that was very, very inspiring. I've been trying to get a message to our Nobel Peace Prize winning president to try and do something about this. In one sense, you only need a few people to change things. I've talked to John Holdren, his science advisor, and Rose Gottmuller, his nuclear advisor, talking to them about the climatic effects and pointing out that President Obama can reduce our weapons without a treaty with Russia. The treaty says the maximum number, not the minimum number. So have you been more successful at talking to President Obama and urging him to do this?
Let me say, first of all, something for President Obama. His speech in Prague, which he made just several months after taking office, was one of the most eloquent and passionate pleas for the elimination of nuclear weapons. I can still remember how thrilled I was when I heard that speech. I don't think we'll probably ever get a president who knew more about the subject and cared more about the subject than he did. His first few years in office, he actually had a very successful set of actions, including a negotiation of the new New START treaty with Russia. Most importantly, I think, he started the nuclear summits. The nuclear summit is the single best thing that this country has ever done to reduce the danger of nuclear terrorism. Because a terrorist will only get a nuclear weapon, as suggested in this video, if they can get a hold of the fissile material. And what the summit's goal is to get better control of the fissile material all over the world. The last meeting of the summit, as you know, was just yesterday. And I have several messages to the President I'm trying to get across. That's not one of them. One of them is, please work to continue the work of the nuclear summit beyond this last meeting, either by having more summits, follow-on summits, which I recommended, or secondly, if that doesn't work out, at least creating the institutional process which will continue the work of trying to get better control of fissile material. The other message I have to him is, for God's sakes, let's re-engage with Russia. The context we're talking about, which makes it so dangerous, comes from the hostile U.S.-Russian relationships, which in many ways are worse than they were during many years of the Cold War. I understand that President Putin and President Obama cannot stand to be in the same room with each other. There's a personal animosity there. But I think both presidents have to rise above that personal animosity and consider the responsibility they have in the positions. They must meet again. They must talk seriously about nuclear danger. Certainly, the nuclear terrorism is a danger which both countries face. That video that I showed you could just as well have happened in Moscow as happened in Washington. So it's a problem for both countries, and the least we can be doing is working together on that problem, nation to nation. If we could succeed in cooperating with that, maybe that would break the ice enough that we start working together on other issues as well. So I come in with much more limited objectives and goals as you have. I have some feeling of political achievability, and I try to recommend things I have some hopes that it would be achieved.
My name is Cristina Martinez. Thank you, Mr. Perry, for being here. I want to ask you.
It's my honor to be here with my colleague Max here, who is a great pleasure for me to meet him, to learn the very great work he is doing. And I learned a lot from listening to other speakers at this conference this morning. Please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Correct me if I'm wrong. First of all, I want to ask two questions which are related. Number one, the North Atlantic Alliance was built to counter the Warsaw Pact. Why, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO still exists actively? Second, regarding the Berlin Wall, it is my understanding that there was a quid pro quo agreement between President Reagan and Gorbachev, and that was that the Berlin Wall went down and NATO wouldn't move 1 inch to the east. Is that true?
On the first question, when the Cold War ended, NATO saw the possibility of creating a security organization for all of Europe, including Russia. And we started out, I think, in the right direction. We created something called the Partnership for Peace, which invited former Warsaw Pact members and former republics of the Soviet Union to join us. And we conducted together joint peacekeeping, military operations, but joint peacekeeping operations. And during the Bosnian War, which was a peacekeeping operation sanctioned by the United Nations, most of those Warsaw Pact nations joined us. Remarkably, Russia sent a brigade to Bosnia operating under an American general and an American division. It took me 4 meetings with the Russian Minister of Defense to get an agreement for how that was going to happen. But it did happen. So for 4 or 5 years there, NATO was a force for peace and for bringing the East-West together. What has happened since then, I think, stimulated primarily by NATO's decision to expand its active membership to the East, and Russia to become alienated from NATO and drop away from it, I think was a tragedy. But NATO itself was serving and could still a very useful purpose in bringing peace to the whole area, and could still have served that function had it not taken the wrong direction.
We're going to see that peace.
We're not moving in that direction at all now, I'm sorry to say.
And the second.
Okay, I just want to make sure we give everybody a chance. So let's hear your question. Thank you again. Yours.
Hello. Ian Brinkley here. I work with LaRouche PAC. I agree with what you said, that we are probably closer to nuclear war than we've ever been. But I disagree with what you said as to the cause of it. You implied in your remarks that it was on account of Russia's hostile posture to the United States, when in reality, it's the United States which is currently the biggest purveyor of violence and warfare on the planet under the direction of President Obama. We are allied with nations which sponsor terrorism openly, Saudi Arabia and Turkey being a couple of them. We were the ones who organized the takeover of the government of Ukraine, as was Victoria Nuland, was literally caught on tape organizing the coup there. So it wasn't Russia. And China and Russia have consistently offered to the United States collaboration on the things we need, like fighting terrorism, as you saw what Putin did in Syria, which was successful, whereas our operation was not, like you see with China. Yes, I do. Thank you.
Those are very interesting points you make. I want to make sure that we let everybody ask questions. So I think there's enough in there already to get some good answers.
Just one question is that, would you agree that President Obama's policy is now pushing us towards nuclear confrontation with Russia and China?
Right.
No.
Over to you.
My answer is no.
Okay, next question, and make sure that these are questions, not statements. We'll have plenty of chances to discuss
Is this
later.
on? Okay, good. Hi, I'm Louisa. I'm a student here at MIT. I'm sorry, I have a question. I have one brief thing to say before that, which is just that for the earlier question about the Cuban Missile Crisis, if you weren't aware, the archives of all the conversations that President Kennedy had while he was negotiating what to do and deciding are available online. They're extremely interesting. I highly recommend you check them out. And the statement that Bobby Kennedy and JFK were the only ones opposed to...
Do you have a question?
I do.
There?
The statement that Bobby Kennedy and JFK were the only ones opposed to military action is accurate. My question is, what do you see as the role for engineers and just, academics in general in working towards a more peaceful world, especially given the climate we have today with Russia?
First of all, they should speak out. Now, second of all, first of all, they should think and study the problem. Secondly, they should speak out. And third, they should be open to going into either advising the government or going into the government. As I did. I must say I did not volunteer for it. I was drafted, but I'm glad I did it. And it's open to all scientists.
All right, we have time for 2, 3 more questions. Maybe even all 4 of you, if they are questions and if they're very short. So why don't you set a gold standard here for us?
Okay, I'll try my best, Max. Charles Ferguson, Federation of American Scientists. It's been a pleasure to work with Dr. Perry about 8 or 9 years ago, Council on Foreign Relations. Very inspiring work that he has done. So, okay, my question is getting to the 1D word or 2D words, deterrence and disarmament. I'll ask them about deterrence. Do you see this as a roadblock in some sense to getting at a nuclear weapon-free world, but on the other hand, having worked with people in Japan and South Korea and having been to China last year in a strategic dialogue, especially East Asia, the lady earlier asked about NATO, how do we handle these issues of nuclear deterrence when we have key allies still wanting, quote unquote, the protection of nuclear weapons while we're trying to move toward a nuclear weapon-free world?
Charles, I think nuclear deterrence is greatly misunderstood and overrated. But having said that, we're living with it for a while. And what we must concentrate on, I believe, is being sure that what is happening now in terms of nuclear rearmament, in terms of the policies even we have, are focused on, as long as we have deterrence, we understand is for the our nuclear weapons are for the sole purpose of preventing a nuclear attack on the United States. We are in danger, I think, of moving to policies different from that, more belligerent than that, which make more dangerous. So while I have my concerns and hesitations about nuclear deterrence as a policy, I think while we have it, we should be sure it is focused on that one objective.
All right. Quick question.
Yeah. I'm excited to hear that. So President Obama is planning to visit Hiroshima this year, where I come from. My question is, if that happens, what do you expect him to do in Hiroshima?
If President Obama goes to Hiroshima, I would recommend that he make a speech while he's there, and use the occasion of emotion. To make a speech, what should the subject of the speech be? He's not going to make a speech apologizing for Hiroshima. There were millions of American lives at stake if we'd had to invade Japan, and tens of millions of Japanese lives at stake. So that's not going to be what he's going to do, even if I recommended to him, which I would not. I recommend what he would do is take that occasion to point out the inhumanity of nuclear weapons. A perfect example of it right in front of us in Hiroshima, and pledge that he would do everything he could do and everything the United States could do to ensure that nuclear weapons are never, ever used again.
Okay, we'll do. Quick?
I can make it quick.
All right, make it quick.
Okay.
We will have, I think we're going to cut this will be the last question for now, but don't despair, because you'll have one more chance to ask Dr. Perry questions later, because he's also going to be on the discussion panel. All right, so.
Dr. Perry, just quick. First, quick question is, what do you have a message for somebody who's just a young scientist with a degree which has no practical use, a PhD in math, just like yours? What can I do more than just investing the money that I don't have yet to help? The second quick question is, nobody brought it up today, so people are starting to worry about artificial intelligence. Have you ever thought, or have you ever heard the worries about a combined effect of artificial intelligence and nuclear weapons? Just
There is a new emerging danger with nuclear weapons tied to science, one of them being a potential of a cyber attack on our command and control system, or on the Russian command and control system. And there's theoretically some application of artificial intelligence here. Nothing I've ever read of what has been thought of or proposed makes very much sense to me, I must say. So I can't say much about how artificial intelligence might be used in this particular problem. It's played a major role in other fields, but I don't see a role yet in this field. That may be my lack of understanding rather than the fact. But I think the major concern today is that there could be some sort of a malicious cyber attack, either on our command and control system or on the Russians' command and control system, which would do great mischief.
Great. Haley from Tufts is going to get the very, very, very last question before we go.
The last question is always the worst.
It's a big one. So I'm a freshman at Tufts studying international relations, and I was wondering if you could offer me some career advice of where I should go, like pursue my career in the federal government to cause the biggest change and social impact.
What's your major at Tufts?
International relations.
My recommendation would be not to try to go directly in the federal government, but try to establish yourself as a career in some other field first, and then from that position pivot into the government at a later time when you have more to offer the government. Have some background or experience in academia or an industry to take with you when you go into the government. That's based on my limited experience of going into the government. I only did it twice in my life.
Okay.
And I pivoted once from an industrial job and the second time from an academic job. So.
Great. Thank you.
All right, let's thank Dr. Perry again.